Life has something to teach, and we have something to learn. Life is a good teacher. And if you look at creation, if you look at nature, there is a particular way about it. And when you and I allow ourselves to be molded, shaped, and formed, God will use creation, God will use nature to bring us to that place that we need to be. And so if we are wise, we allow the wave to carry us. And if we allow it, it will carry you for a great distance. You can just lay there. But if you swim against it, it'll beat you up. That's the way nature is. And so there is a certain attitude about both of these characters in the gospel this morning. There's an attitude of arrogance on one's part, and there's an attitude of humility on the other's part. But I listened to the second reading from St. Paul's letter to Timothy. I am being poured out like a libation, and the time of my departure is close at hand. A libation is a wine offering that's poured into the fire. This is an old man who's writing this. And this old man, who was a Pharisee, his attitude is much different than it was in the very beginning before he had his conversion. Paul is saying, I have been through the fire. I've been through the fire to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And by proclaiming it and by preaching it, I was able to do what God asked me to do, but at the same time, God molded me and formed me and shaped me to become the man I was intended to be in the very beginning. Listen to what St. Paul, the former Saul, what he had to experience. Labors, imprisonments, beatings, numerous brushes with death. 5 times at the hands of the Jews, I received 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I passed the night and the day on the deep, on frequent journeys, in dangers from rivers and from robbers, dangers from my own race, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, at sea, and dangers among false brothers. In toil and hardship, through many sleepless nights, through hunger and thirst, through frequent fastings, through cold and exposure. And apart from these things, there is the daily pressure upon me of my anxiety for all of the churches. This is a much different man who in the very beginning, it says, right in the Acts of the Apostles, now Saul, still breathing murderous threats against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, that if he should find any men or women who belonged to the way, he might bring them to Jerusalem in chains. And then there was the stoning of Stephen. And after they stoned him and he lay there a bloody mess, they took their cloaks off as a symbol and a gesture of respect and reverence and laid them at Saul's feet. That's who Saul was as a young man. But as he writes to Timothy, he's now an old man, having gone through all of those things that I just read to you. Life has something to teach, and we have something to learn. And I'm going to bet you, although it doesn't say so and I can't prove it, but I would be willing to wager that the character in the gospel this morning, this Pharisee, Paul was a Pharisee. This Pharisee, I'm going to bet you, is a young, inexperienced guy, just starting out. You know how it is. You know when you're young, you're full of it. You feel like you're 10 feet tall and bulletproof. And there isn't anything you can't do. You know, when you're young, you don't have to worry about too much because you don't have too many responsibilities yet. And so you really don't have to think about anybody but yourself. You know, I went for a visit to my family on Thursday for an overnight. And it's always amazing to me for me to step back and watch the family, to watch my son, and to watch my daughter-in-law, who is very pregnant right now. Going to have her baby in December. And to watch them parent, and to watch them interact with one another. Oh, I remember, and I told my son, Scott, I remember when you were 16, 17 years old. You used to like to sleep in late. Remember, Scott? Now he's up at 5 a.m. because he's a husband and he's a father. And that letter that I read to you of all those sufferings, any parent could have written that. Those are the struggles and the sufferings of people, okay, who are being formed and molded and shaped and giving their lives for somebody else. When they come to recognize and to understand, it isn't about them anymore. It was never about them. It was about others. And so God allows these little humiliations of sorts in our lives to chip a little here and chip a little there and cut a little here and cut a little there to mold us and shape us in order that we become the people that God intended for us to be. We have to come to that place in our lives where we finally understand who we really are. That prayer from that Pharisee doesn't sound like anybody who's dependent on God. It sounds like it's coming from a person that God ought to be thankful he's there, doing all these things for him. And that tax collector, I'm going to bet you his hair is the same color as mine, if he's got any. It sounds like someone who's gone through the fire. It sounds like someone who's experienced life. Someone who knows what it means to be shipwrecked. Someone who knows what it's like to take a beating. Someone who knows what it means to be cut off and imprisoned. Life is a good teacher, and we have something to learn. Oh, you know, things change. I'm 62, and I can tell you that my thinking today is quite different than it was when I was 22. I look back on those years, those 40 years of life, and I think about some of the things that I said, some of the things that I did, how I thought, and it's kind of embarrassing, to be honest with you. Before Mass, I stood before you and I said, please, continue to pray for me, that I be a holy priest. I'm serious about that because that is what the Lord is going to call me to give an accounting for. I am going to have to stand before Christ and have to account for everything I said to you, everything I did, and everything I failed to say to you, and everything I failed to do. Please, please pray for me. Pray me to holiness. Because I'm at a point in my life at 62 years old, I'm not so focused on the past. I'm focused on where I'm headed. My eternity. And trust me when I tell you, there are times that I think about my life, and I wonder about my salvation. I don't want to lose my salvation. I don't want to go to hell. But I think that having a healthy fear of that is a good thing. And so I need your prayers. And you need mine. We all need one another's prayers. We all need one another's love and support. And through it all, through life, she's a good teacher. And you change. You see, because when you're at a place in your life and you think that you got all the answers, you know what happens? Cancer comes. And then all of a sudden you begin to realize you don't have all the answers anymore. Or you start to realize that you're going to lose your eyesight. And you begin to realize that the gift of sight is one of the greatest gifts that you've had all of your life that you never appreciated. And now you're losing it. And you see things so differently than you did before. Now, position and power and money aren't so important anymore. And then there's death, especially the unexpected deaths, especially those in our families where parents who never even remotely consider that there's a possibility that they're going to have to bury one of their children. Talk about something that cuts you off at the ankles. Talk about a lesson in life. You know, while I was on retreat with my spiritual director, he gave me a new definition of humility, one that I had never heard of or considered before. He's a wise man, Monsignor Essef. He's 85. Life has been a very good teacher for him. He said to me, you know, there's a difference between humiliation and humility. He said, humiliation is when life tears you down. And life has that ability to do that. As a teacher, it cuts away. So the humiliations, okay, that we experience are God's way of allowing us to be molded and shaped and formed. The humiliations, the little chippings and cuttings that we experience in our lives is when life tears you down. But Monsignor said, Father Paul, humility is when God raises you up. I loved it. And I thought of the Blessed Virgin Mary because she said, I am the lowly handmaid of the Lord. God has done mighty things for me and in me, and holy is his name. Did you hear what St. Paul says to Timothy? The Lord stood by me and gave me strength, so that through me the proclamation might become completed, and all of the Gentiles might hear it. And I was rescued from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil threat and will bring me safe to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. This is an old man who has allowed and experienced life as a teacher. And he's been humiliated. And now in humility, God is going to raise him up. Life is a good teacher. And we have something to learn.